You're someone who hasn't filed taxes in 5, 10, or maybe even 20 years. You're not alone. I talk to people every single week who are terrified to deal with the IRS because they think it's too late and there's no way to fix this. Or maybe the IRS is going to take everything I own, or even I'm going to go to jail. But in many cases, the situation is much more manageable than these people think. And today I'm going to explain to you what really happens when someone hasn't filed taxes in years and what you should do next. I'm Bob Jablonsky. I'm an enrolled agent and I'm a certified tax resolution specialist. I help taxpayers across the country deal with their IRS problems and resolve them successfully. And that includes taxpayers who have large debts, as well as people we're talking about today who have years of unfiled tax returns. One of the biggest misconceptions that I run into with people is that they believe that the longer they wait, somehow the problem is just going to disappear. Usually, unfortunately, it does the exact opposite. If you're someone with years of unfiled returns, click the link in the description or in the pinned comment below and let's talk. In the meantime, let's talk today about how the IRS handles non-filers. So what normally happens when you don't file? When you don't file a tax return, the IRS doesn't necessarily forget about you. Remember, the IRS is going to receive copies of your W-2s and your 1099s, including those with brokerage income, maybe retirement withdrawals, and other income records that will help them to understand who needs to be filing. So even if you never file, the IRS often has enough information to estimate what they believe you owe. And in some cases, they create what's called a substitute for return, or SFR. That's basically where the IRS is filing a tax return for you. But here's the problem. The IRS version usually isn't going to include many deductions and credits that you are due, including those related to your dependents. As a matter of fact, they won't even know you have dependents, or if you, for example, should be filing single or maybe head of household if you have multiple dependents that you're caring for. Maybe you have a business and they know about your business income, but not your business expenses. Or there's just other things that may be to your benefit that they're not aware of. So, what happens is the balance that they calculate, because they don't have all of your information, especially that which benefits you, is often much higher than it actually should be. So here's the question. People come into me, they're scared, and they say, is it too late? Well, the good news is in most situations, it's not too late to fix the problem. And in no cases is it too late to file. You need to get caught up. So in fact, what the IRS is often focused on is getting taxpayers back into what they consider to be tax compliance, rather than demanding every single missing tax return from the beginning of time. So what does that mean? Well, many of the people that I talk with are surprised to learn that the IRS commonly requires only the last 6 years of returns to become compliant. Actually, they have a policy statement out there, policy statement 5-133, that states that. Now, there are different cases where there are going to be exceptions, but they are the exceptions. For most people, it's going to be the last 6 years. And that's one reason. That's one reason why people shouldn't assume that they need to file 15 or 20 years of returns before getting help. Actually, filing 15 or 20 years could create bigger problems with you with bigger balances that I sometimes run into. Once you file the returns, you can't undo them. So it's best to figure out first, what do you actually need to file? And another important point is some taxpayers actually discover they owe far less than what's expected once they file the correct returns. And even occasionally, I find taxpayers who are actually owed refunds. And hopefully they didn't wait too long and they're no longer eligible for them, but they actually receive that refund to their great surprise. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that I see taxpayers make who are non-filers? Well, here's some of the biggest mistakes that I see personally. One is ignoring an IRS notices and letters. Another thing that I see occur is filing returns without a strategy. First, they may file returns that they don't need to file, which ends up being they owe more than they really would have had to if they only filed the last 6 years. And then sometimes they just start rushing to file these returns. And even if they file the 6 years, they're now getting notices of collection due and they're panicking in regards to how do they respond to that, as opposed to going through the process, understanding what their options are, and having a plan in mind before it all begins so that they're being proactive and they're handling it in a manner that is best for them versus on the urgent needs, the urgency created by the IRS. And then mistake number three, and this happens all the time, they assume that jail is just around the corner. And the reality is, for most non-filers, what we're talking about is civil cases. They're not criminal cases. The IRS is generally trying to collect money, not put the average taxpayer in prison. Obviously, there are situations where that's not the case, but those are usually involving fraud or a criminal conduct that's involved, not the average taxpayers who just owes the IRS. What I find quite often is that people file those returns and they're telling me how much better they feel that they're now caught up. So, what should you do to get started? If you haven't filed taxes in years, then where I would generally say you should start by pulling your IRS transcripts. You can tell from those transcripts which years you filed, which years you haven't filed, if the IRS has filed a substitute for return on your behalf already, and that tells you what actions you need to take. You're also going to be able to find out, for example, what income was reported on your behalf to the IRS. So you don't just create another problem by missing a bunch of income and creating incorrect returns. After you've pulled all those IRS transcripts and you've determined how to file your returns, you're going to figure out, like I said, which file returns you need to file and how to file those returns accurately. And then the third thing is develop a strategy before you submit the returns. This may include looking at what payment plans are available to you based on what you can pay and what the IRS will require you to pay. Whether you qualify for currently not collectible status or penalty relief, or whether you might even qualify for a settlement or an offer in compromise. But you should have a plan as to how to address your situation. And as I mentioned earlier, I've seen many taxpayers who haven't filed for more than 10 years. They come into me, they finally address the issue, and they have an enormous relief once they start taking action. You'd be surprised at how many come in and say, Bob, I feel so much better. I'm going to be able to sleep at night now. I know what I need to do, and I just need to move forward and do it. So if you are someone who hasn't filed taxes in years, the worst thing you usually can do is just to continue avoiding the problem. Your IRS situation is rarely going to improve with time alone. And many taxpayers, they have more options than they actually realize until I talk with them or until they really research the situation. If you'd like help understanding your situation, feel free to schedule a consultation. As I mentioned, it's in the pinned comment below, as well as in the description to this video. And if you found this video helpful, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.